All right, today we're diving into the world of one of history's most fascinating and, honestly, mysterious peoples, the Scythians. For centuries, their name basically meant nomadic power, but their story is so much more complex than just a bunch of steppe warriors.
So who exactly were these people? Well, imagine this incredible equestrian force that controlled a massive territory, stretching all the way from Central Asia into Eastern Europe. They left behind this legacy of gold, warfare, and legend that honestly still captivates us today. Okay, let's get right into this, because their whole identity is baked right into their name. The word Scythian actually comes from what they called themselves, Scuda. And what does it mean? It literally translates to the shooter or the archer. So, before we know anything else, we know what they were masters of.
And that skill as archers, it's what allowed them to just explode onto the world stage. So let's start at the beginning and look at their origins and how they first made their mark.
So their story really kicks off with this huge migration. Sometime around the 9th century BC, they get pushed out of Central Asia and start moving west. In the process, they boot another nomadic group, the Cimmerians, out of the way. By the 7th century, they're raiding the great empires of West Asia. And by the 6th century, boom, they've carved out a seriously powerful kingdom in the Pontic steppe, which is basically modern-day Ukraine and southern Russia.
And this just goes to show, they were not some isolated tribe, no way. They were major players on the world stage. I mean, they were making alliances with the mighty Neo-Assyrian Empire. They dominated the Medes for a while, conquered entire kingdoms like Urartu, and went toe-to-toe with powers like Lydia. They were right in the thick of ancient world politics.
So you have to ask, how did they do it? What was their secret? It really came down to military innovation. They perfected the art of mounted warfare. They introduced these deadly composite bows that you could fire with incredible precision from horseback. And they had scale armor that gave them way better protection. For their time, they were nothing short of a military revolution on horseback. But here's the thing, they were more than just warriors. All that military might allowed them to build a really sophisticated and powerful civilization, one that would become a major power broker in the ancient economy. You know, archaeologists can actually trace their huge influence through something called the Scythian triad. It's pretty cool. Wherever you find this very specific combination of weapons, these elaborate horse harnesses, and this unique dynamic art style all about animals, you know the Scythians were there. It's like their cultural fingerprint. Now, this one number, this just blows my mind. It illustrates their economic power perfectly. So forget that image of simple nomads, right? The farmers under Scythian control were producing so much extra grain that they sold 16,000 tons of it every year just to one Greek city. And that grain then went on to feed the powerhouse of Athens. They were basically the breadbasket for the ancient Greek world. And you can see here, their economy was incredibly diverse. I mean, yeah, nomadic herding of horses and cattle was central to their life, but that was supported by massive grain exports, a really profitable slave trade, control over vital trade routes connecting east and west, and some very sophisticated metallurgy. This was a complex, wealthy, and powerful economic system.
All of this economic success fueled a golden age, and it allowed them to build a society that completely defied the simple and kind of lazy stereotypes that their neighbors often threw at them.
The Greeks, who depended on them for food, often wrote them off as, uncivilized barbarians. But the reality that archaeology has uncovered tells a completely different story. We see a people with a vast trade network, advanced metalworking, and an artistic tradition that produced some of the most absolutely stunning gold objects from anywhere in the ancient world.
And if you need the ultimate proof of their sophistication, just look at this guy, Anacharsis. He was a Scythian prince who traveled to Greece, and his wisdom so impressed the Athenians that they made him a citizen. They even counted him among their legendary 7 sages. That's hardly the resume of a savage. And their society wasn't some simple, flat, nomadic horde either. Not at all. It was a highly organized state with a really clear social hierarchy. You had the royal Scythians at the top, then free commoners, then land-bound serfs, and finally slaves at the bottom. This was a complex, functioning kingdom. But this great power, which seemed totally invincible for centuries, would eventually just vanish. So how does an entire empire of the steppe just disappear off the map? Well, it wasn't one single thing. It was a total perfect storm. They got hit from all sides at once. A rival nomadic group, the Sarmatians, invaded from the east. Their incredibly profitable grain trade was undercut by a resurgent Egypt. They suffered critical military defeats against Philip of Macedon, and to top it all off, their own lands were weakened by environmental pressures.
The pillars of their entire empire just crumbled all at once.
Defeated and displaced, the Scythians were pushed to the edges of their former empire, into these little pockets in Crimea and along the Danube River. And over the next few centuries, they were slowly just absorbed by new groups like the Goths and the Sarmatians. By the 3rd century AD, their distinct culture was gone.
But even after they disappeared as a distinct people, the Scythians left these powerful echoes that have resonated through history for thousands of years. I mean, their influence was immense. They pioneered cavalry tactics that would be copied for centuries. Their unique animal-style art influenced cultures as far away as the Celts. You know the Greek legends of the Amazons? Well, their warrior women may very well have sparked those stories. And for centuries, their name just became a shorthand for all steppe nomads, while figures like Archaeology made them the original noble savage in literature.
One of the very first Greek descriptions we have of them, from the poet Hesiod, just captures this powerful, almost mythical image. He called them the milk drinkers who have wagons for houses. It just evokes this world of constant movement, right? A people whose entire life was tied to the vast open steppe.
And this legendary status just lived on and on, long after they were gone. I mean, get this. In the Middle Ages, Irish myths claimed their ancestors were actually Scythian princes. Fast forward to the 19th century, and Russian poets were embracing this Scythian identity to represent Russia's wild, untamable spirit caught between Europe and Asia. Their legacy became this incredibly powerful symbol.
Which really brings us back to the central mystery, doesn't it? The Scythians show us that even the most dominant powers can be erased by a perfect storm of events, becoming these fascinating ghosts of history. Their story leaves us with this incredible question: how does a culture that once basically ruled its world vanish so completely, leaving behind such a glittering and enigmatic trail?